Hello, everybody. This is the Two Pointers Podcast, a podcast where two childhood best friends, myself, Trevor, and my co-host, Josh, talk all things hoops. We'll analyze and debate news and what's happening in the world of basketball today.
On today's podcast, we're going to kick things off by going over the top stories in the NBA for the first couple weeks of the season. And then we're going to follow that up by introducing a new segment where we talk about stories around the NBA and whether we think it's news or if it's something that's not big news. So I'll swing it over to you, Trevor, and let's get us started on our first big story for today.
Top stories of the week. And before I get started with that, I do want to say shout out to everyone that did download and listen and 5-star the first time. As of recording this, we're at 58 downloads for the first episode. As somebody who's never done this, we're really thankful for that. So obviously off the top here, if you guys could 5-star and download it and subscribe, that would be awesome. Spotify, Apple, wherever you find your podcasts, it's on all those sites and we'll be able to get out to you once a week. First of all, top stories of the week. We're going to cover Miss Becky Hammon. Miss Becky Hammon, for those of you might not have seen, became the first woman acting head coach in NBA history after Coach Pop was ejected in the second quarter versus the Lakers. This is a really big deal, whether it was covered a lot or whether it was covered a little. This is a really big deal for the NBA and for, frankly, men's North American professional sports. I have an angle of this that I wanted to kind of address in terms of towards Josh as well as towards the listeners that I saw and I noticed as a Lakers fan who watched that game, as well as just it was a spotlight game. It was a lot of people were watching that game after that happened, especially after watching that clip back multiple times. It looks like Greg Popovich got himself ejected on purpose, and I say that in the most polite sense possible. He didn't look very upset at all, and it was on a petty foul. It was on like a petty shooting foul where Marc Gasol was sliding his feet and keeping his hands up. He wasn't in the three, in the lane. Like it was like the pettiest little foul on DeMar DeRozan, and like he didn't look mad whatsoever. I know it's hard to tell with a mask on, right? Safe and all on the sideline, but he didn't seem mad at all. No getting in the face, nothing. It was his second technical in the second quarter. Something seems a little off there. Possibly because it was against the Lakers, because it was on a large spotlight, because it was a really big deal trying to get her time. The other thing is they have Tim Duncan as an assistant. Why wouldn't they let their, heir to the throne for the coaching job there, possibly their greatest player of all time? I don't think that's a debate. Why not let him be the guy that takes over? But in this case, obviously, making sure Becky gets her shine like that. It's a really, really big deal, like I said, for men's professional sports. It's happened before, like overseas in like Italy and some of these Series 3 soccer clubs, but it's never happened in something like this scale of a league. And obviously I think this could be possibly the sign of the passing of the torch for the first woman in men's professional North American sports.
So one thing that I had to check on, I believe that Tim Duncan stepped down as a full-time assistant for the Spurs back in early November. So, and has moved into a player development role. He's still with the team on the coaching staff, but is no longer one of Popovich's assistant coaches. And so that would indicate you're right, because with Popovich, getting ejected is nothing new. And looking at the story, I was looking back at some of the history of it. Popovich was ejected twice last season. Both times he tabbed Tim Duncan to fill in as the head coach. Hammon was the assistant to Duncan in that scenario. And this year, with Duncan having left the coaching staff and Popovich getting ejected this year, it looks like Becky Hammon will be the coach he goes to in that scenario. I don't expect it to be the last one this season, which Becky Hammon gets a chance to head up the Spurs in an NBA game. But like you said, I mean, I'm really excited for it. Becky Hammon, from all things I can tell, I don't follow the Spurs as closely to know a lot about Becky Hammon's coaching styles, but she seems to be just a really incredible coach. Players around the NBA really rave about her basketball knowledge, so I'm really excited to see her get a shot.
Yeah, if I remember correctly, seeing as well, she was a six-time WNBA All-Star and also a champion as well. She's loved in that city. She's a beloved person in San Antonio. And obviously, I think it's a perfect role for her. It's a perfect fit. Those guys in that locker room love her. It's obviously a great system that Pop's built over many, many years now, multiple championships, a dynasty, if you might even say, in multiple periods in terms of just how he's handled that as a head coach. And I think she's going to be a great players coach. The players love her. Everything I've seen, everything I've read, she's beloved by a lot of those guys. And I think it's they got a decent young core now with Murray and White, but I think they'll be able to. I think she'll be a good coach. I don't know. Like I said, this is just a sneaky suspicion. This is not anything I've seen verbatim. I just think this is a sign. It could be a sign of Pop really just trying to get her the reins. And obviously, I'd be really stoked to see this happen.
All right, moving on to our next story for the day, we're going to talk about Stephen Curry's incredible game Sunday night against the Trailblazers. Steph went off with 62 points against the Trailblazers on Sunday night, which was a career high for Stephen Curry. He joined Klay Thompson and Wilt Chamberlain as the only other players in Warriors franchise history to score 60-plus in a game, and was able to carry the Warriors to the win. The Warriors have really been on a bit of a roll lately. What have you thought of the Warriors lately, Trevor?
I definitely feel wrong about my first opinion of them from opening night, where I was, and I quote, "Warriors look bad, Wiseman looks good. Wiseman looks good, Warriors look bad," end quote. In whatever order. I still think they're going to make some crazy, scary playoff run? No, I think the loss of Klay is just still going to hurt them so bad. But first of all, let me say this. I'm really surprised that that's his first 60-point game. As many threes as he's shot, it does surprise me. It really does. Like, obviously Klay did it. He had 61, and he did 60. It on like 18 dribbles, 60. So he did it on like 18 dribbles. Like, obviously Curry's a lot different player in that sense. Clay's will always be my favorite 60-point game or above 60-point game other than Devin Booker's 70. But it blows my mind that that's his first time doing 60. And of course, I found out about it before I even saw it on a news, like in our group chat. Shout out to our friend Hunter, already like, Curry's going crazy. And it's like 12:15 Eastern time. And I'm like, oh, what's going on? And I'm like about to go to bed, because I wasn't watching games that night, and I see a text from him, and I'm like, oh, Curry's going crazy. Guess what we're covering? Probably Curry going crazy. But yeah, obviously they're struggling, or they might have looked like they're struggling early on. I think they'll get to that 7-8 where we both kind of, I didn't have them that high. I know I had them I had them way out of the playoff race, but I know you had them in that, I think you had them in that 7, 8, 10, 11 range, maybe something like that.
I had Golden State in that I don't know what to do with you phase of the standings, because I wasn't with Klay Thompson there. Obviously, I'm looking at like them being one of the top 5 teams in the West, I think, just because I'm so confident in Steph and Klay. But once Klay goes down with injury, based on how we saw things went for them last year, you just don't know where things are going to go. I was really excited to see that Steph is doing well. He struggled with injuries a lot last season. And it's really nice to see one of the NBA's top players kind of get back into form, not be bothered by that injury bug as much anymore. One thing I did want to mention on this story last in the wrapping up part, I mentioned that only 2 other Warriors in history have scored 60-plus point games, that being Klay Thompson, who had a 60-point game, and then Wilt Chamberlain. Can you tell me how many times Wilt Chamberlain had a 60-point game when he was a Warrior?
2016 me, when I was taking every Sporkle quiz online every day between college classes, or 2017 me would probably know this off the top of his head. I'm going to say, just because of how many times I know the 50-point stat I used to know. 60, I'm probably going to say 25.
27. You were very close.
Oh.
But it's absolutely insane. So there have been 29 60-plus point games in Warriors history, 1 by Stephen Curry, 1 by Klay Thompson, and 27 by Wilt Chamberlain.
He was a different beast. Obviously, once the season's over, I want to go through eventually. We've talked about it a little bit, going through like a documentary kind of series, possibly going over some players that deserve some respect, and maybe going over some guys that before our era. Well, it's going to be a fun one for sure. One final thing to know on Steph, I will say he was shooting career lows from threes and from the field prior to that game. I don't know if that's an indication of what's to come long term. I think he's gonna get back to not necessarily 2-time MVP form, but he's definitely going to continue to he's going to get better he played a good guy. He played a good guy named Lillard, Damian Lillard. Ever heard of him? No, good player. He good defender for the most part for that position. He's above average, but obviously he lit him up, and I think they're going to get back to being fine. They'll scare somebody in that 7, 8, 10, 11 range.
So moving into our last top story for the day, around the start of the NBA season, when Adam Silver was addressing the press about the state of the NBA heading into the new year, he was asked about the possibility of NBA expansion. And it was in this instance that Silver kind of diverged from his usual standpoint on NBA expansion, which was usually his focus was on small market teams currently in the NBA and making sure that all 30 teams were competitive. Silver's tune has changed a little bit. He said that expansion is something the NBA is looking into a lot more now. And it's definitely something they're considering more, although he still says it's a long way off. But still, Silver changing his tune to say the NBA is now considering expansion more is a break from previous precedent with the NBA. And so I wanted to throw it over to you, Trevor, and ask, what do you think about the NBA expanding, and when they expand, because it's definitely a when and not an if, where do you think they should go?
For the sake of financial well-being of the league after a global pandemic, which is something we've never seen for any professional sport like this, for the sake of the league, you're correct. It's a matter of when. Obviously it's a matter of where once we figure out when. Would I be like any other major news network if I said Seattle and they have to be the Supersonics, like you mentioned before we started recording? It's got to be, right? One of two, right? It's got to be two, I think, at that point. It's got to be 32. I don't see any reason. There's just so much ad share or so much money share in terms of just the way the escrow part works. I'm not going to bore you guys with all that. I've done that math before. I've looked into it. I've also listened to a podcast about it, and I promise you I'm not going to bore you with it. The escrow stuff is all like, it basically will help a Memphis. It will help not Toronto. I was going to say Toronto for some reason. It's going to help a small market team like a Memphis or like a Portland or like a Thunder or a place like that, where like that money's going to go to somewhere it's needed, right? It's going to eventually find the right hands. The league's going to need it eventually. And I don't have any suspicions other than Seattle. And I know you said you have a couple, so I'm just curious on who you have.
Okay. So, I mean, obviously Seattle's the first one. The Supersonics brand is still strong today, despite them being gone for, I think, about 12 years now, 11 or 12 years from Seattle. So that's obviously the first point to go. Seattle's also expanding with an NHL team in the process at the moment. So Seattle, a booming sports market to go to. I'm going to throw some other cities at you, and I want you to kind of give me a one-sentence reaction to them as I give it to you. The first city that I think, and I haven't seen this anywhere, but it's just going on the part of taking cities and fan bases who had a team at one point, no longer have a team, and often really want one back. What do you think about Vancouver?
Why did I have a suspicion you were going to say that? When you started saying teams that might have one, and I think it makes the most sense for the long term. And here's what I mean. I think they have a fan base, or had, right? It was a really cool brand. The way they rebranded Memphis was really neat. I think getting into another country, whether it's Canada, a second time in Vancouver, just for travel reasons, does it really make a lot of sense? Like, it was miserable when guys were traveling. Now, granted, that was the traveling in the 90s. The way we have it now, I don't think it'd be as problematic, but you have your Seattle possibly there. You'd have your Portland, you'd have your California teams that would play. But I don't love the Vancouver idea. I don't think I think there's probably better potential out there, which I'm sure you've got listed. But Vancouver, I'm not a fan of Vancouver, to say the least.
So the next city I had listed down, this is a city where the Sacramento Kings nearly moved to the city several years back. So we know that it's a viable market where fans would like to go. It's not where I would think of as a really good sports market, because they've had pro sports teams before and it hasn't gone well. But Anaheim, California is an option. What do you think?
Yeah. Do we need another California team? Probably not. But does financially it make sense with the whole former Angels thing? If Sacramento considered it, yeah, I could see it for money reasons. The only thing that scares me is how the Oakland market has kind of completely fallen off a cliff. But obviously, I think that's more of a city problem than it is a league sports problem. Obviously, with the A's being the only team left in Oakland. I think the Anaheim thing makes sense if they can squeeze every ounce of if they can squeeze every dollar out of it.
Yeah, so I'm not very big on the Anaheim idea. It's just one of those that's out there because they came very close recently to having an NBA team. So it's obvious that they'd like one, but I don't see it. We've had the Angels being in Anaheim with baseball, and it didn't go very well. They moved to LA to be in a more competitive sports market. So I don't see Anaheim being a place that would go. Next city is the one that I think is the most likely option to go with Seattle, because it's a city that had no pro sports teams about 5 years ago and now has two, and it's probably going to look for three. Las Vegas.
This one, you're correct, is a why not. It's more of a why not in the sense of summer leagues there. You've got the gambling aspect that the NBA ever so has embraced in the last year because of the loss of money in the pandemic. They saw the opportunity with people like FanDuel and people like DraftKings. They're embracing it with like a full bear hug, and I don't see why they can't continue to channel that through obviously having a team there. I just to see the dollar signs. When you think of Vegas, you think of dollar signs, duh, right?
Mhm.
But I think in this case, you're right. Seattle and Vegas make the most sense. Is there an Eastern Conference team, or is there like a Eastern, like United States team that you might have? If not, I have a weird one maybe.
So there's one Eastern city that I've seen a lot, and it's because it's more of a college basketball hub. There's a lot of talk about Louisville, Kentucky being a place where I'd want to go because Kentucky University and Louisville University with college basketball are nearly more profitable than any other college basketball programs that we see in the NCAA. And so it's really a basketball hotspot. And it's honestly kind of strange that we haven't seen a professional basketball team there in a very long time.
I got one more that like I have zero backing on this in terms of seeing it anywhere, whatever, just solely for the purpose of similar thing for you, what you were saying with college basketball. This state as a whole is college basketball centric to me, as well as this team and this city that just had a really big run, and they're building up a basketball culture there even more. Dayton, Ohio has 140,000 people as of the newest census. I know that's not a lot in the grand scheme of things. Kind of in that weird spot between Cincinnati, maybe. I know we already got one in Cleveland. It's like it's a shot in the dark. That Columbus or that Cincinnati or that Dayton market. You could channel all three, put it in one of those three. I think it could be beneficial because the Cavs, obviously, without a LeBron there, they're not really turning the page on anybody. Granted, they were first in the East on like day 4 or day 3 of the NBA last week, which whoa, right? But they're still in tank mode. They're still not going to be good for a while, and that city is as boring as ever. I don't know. Maybe that would be a second team in that really basketball rich area.
Yeah, I frankly couldn't disagree more. No, I don't like the idea of the NBA going to Dayton. I think that the Cleveland market, when LeBron isn't there, is one of the ones that Adam Silver normally talked about as a franchise that he wants to get to, making sure all of these small market teams are contending. If Dayton, Ohio would be without a doubt the smallest market by far in the NBA. And I think since, like we talked about before, if the NBA is doing this, they're doing it for a financial means. To be frank, if I were to predict what two cities would get the expansion, it would be Seattle and then Las Vegas, because they're the ones most likely to front the cash and have the best backing to get things going.
I will say this too, like just as a conversation piece for like when we see this coming, when we see this happen eventually, like I said, I think we keep having this conversation about the win. We'll address it then, but I think it'd be really interesting at that point to see who gets kept and see who doesn't. It's just going to be a really interesting pod for that, because we'll get to really kind of divulge and figure out if it's, I know the only reason I even know slightly a lot about it is that the 2K thing, when you expand teams, I know they get X amount of keeps and stuff. And it's going to be similar. It's going to be like figuring out who that 10th or 11th guy is on a really good team. Like they're going to have to let go. Like there's going to be guys there's going to be shocks. There's going to be surprises that we're going to be like, wow, he ended up there. And I'm intrigued. I'm excited to see. And it's just something that in our lifetime, we've never really seen other than the Hornets and Pelicans really weird debacle where I can't figure out what seed they're in half my lifetime. I feel like I've had the Hornets in 2 different cities, but regardless, it's going to be exciting no matter how it happens. Yeah. Vegas. And I don't disagree. I know this is like, we're not supposed to come sit here and we're not going to force any debate, but it's Seattle and Vegas. Does money make any less sense anywhere else? I don't think it does.
Okay. So really enjoyed that discussion. I thought it was definitely an interesting one. but obviously stuff that we're talking about probably years down the line because the NBA is not planning on expanding anytime soon. We're going to introduce a new segment now that we're starting today. We're calling it News or Snooze. I'm going to read out a story in the NBA and throw it to my co-host Trevor, and he's going to let me know if it's news, is it something significant happening in the NBA, or is it snooze? Are we overreacting to it? And the first thing that we're going to talk about is the Brooklyn Nets. The Brooklyn Nets, while starting 2-0 and were incredibly impressive, that if you listen to our first podcast, you heard us talk about and rave about how awesome the Nets are playing, have hit a rough patch and have gone 1-4 since their 2-0 start. Currently 3-4 and are starting to fall behind in the early stages of the Eastern Conference. Trevor, is this news or snooze?
As much as it pains me for the fact that we both have them finishing top 4 in the East, I do think it's snooze for the sense that you mentioned, like from the top, you mentioned how we gave them great praise on our first pod. It scares me because one of the main points was the bench depth and Spencer Dinwiddie having a successful ACL surgery and beginning rehab. Don't really know a timetable yet. I've been searching every day since we were getting ready to record this, and I have not seen a timetable whatsoever from anybody. Woj, Shams, no one. But also, as well as since recording this on January 5th, KD facing a 7-day 4-game quarantine. That can't keep happening. That's obviously the NBA is a very progressive league, and I don't think it's close in terms of who's the most progressive. And obviously, they're going to keep sticking to their guns and doing their COVID protocols and this tracing stuff. We've already seen games get postponed, but I think it's just a matter of that bench depth can't struggle. They've got to be able to have a guy like Dinwiddie there when KD has a 7-day quarantine. And I think they're going to get back to their ways eventually. I just hope that they stay healthy and can get to that point. But this does scare me a little bit, so I do think it is news.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I think things with the Nets are definitely now it's early. They're 3-4. It's not like a hit the panic button. We're talking about a 72-game season this year, but it definitely was worrying after the hot start they were on. I mean, the Nets only win over the past week was against the Atlanta Hawks, in which the Atlanta Hawks still scored 141 points on the Brooklyn Nets in their loss to them. And that was just because the Nets were able to score 145. They were able to get the victory. I was looking, they lost to the Wizards last night in a game in which they turned the ball over 20 times to play winning basketball.
Wizards.
You cannot be turning the ball over and giving away like that. Yeah, I definitely think it's things that the Nets need to clean up. It's not a panic mode situation, but it's definitely some issues where we're seeing they need to play, I think, kind of smarter, cleaner basketball going forward. Okay, moving on to our next story. We're going to look at another prominent NBA team that Trevor and I were fond of that is having some struggles early in the season, the Denver Nuggets. The Denver Nuggets currently are 2-4 in the Western Conference as of today and are not showing out in the way we expected after their Western Conference Finals run back in October. Trevor, is this news or snooze?
As this is only an audio podcast and not a visual, the listeners can't see me yawning. This is definitely snooze. I will also say that we've been doing this 2 episodes now, and we plan on doing this for many. Are we going to call this the 2-pointers cursed? Are we going to call this the 2-pointers pod cursed? Every team we rate at the beginning of the season is going to scare the crap out of us in the first 5 to 7 games where they look like they're not even going to make the playoffs, other than the fact that Jokic is the only reason that team is they've even won 3 games. Murray's going to get back to form. Don't get me wrong. They're going to still finish top 4 because Jokic, like you mentioned to me before we recorded this, he was 2 rebounds away, or 1 in each game, from having, was it every game having a triple-double, or was it like how many?
Yeah, so currently Nikola Jokic has 4 triple-doubles through the first 6 games. The 2 games in which he did not record a triple-double, he had double-digit points and assists, but 9 rebounds in each of those.
Yeah, they're fine. They're going to be fine. He's honestly at this point a candidate for MVP. And if I remember correctly, before the season, he was like plus 2,200, something ridiculous. I'd love to see where that number's at, and I don't have it pulled up, but we should have seen this coming, I feel like.
Yeah, I agree. Snooze. The Nuggets are 2-4. Big whoop. I mean, you're 6 games into the season. They're not 2-4 because it seems like we've seen significant problems. Looking through the numbers, every loss they've had, the opposing team has just shot exceptionally well through the first 4 games. Every team they've played so far this season has shot over 40% from the field. Now, that could be areas to worry about the Nuggets defense, but at the moment, I think it's just more of an anomaly. Teams are shooting exceptionally well against Denver right now, and it's causing them to lose some close games. I think those games will start to shift back the other way, especially with the incredible performances that Jokic is putting on so far. And just mentioning the crazy stat part of it, I have to. Nikola Jokic leads the NBA in assists currently. I know we're only like 7 games in a couple weeks, but he is a center averaging 12.8 assists per game. So shout out to Nikola Jokic, completely changing how we view position roles in the NBA.
He would definitely be the first big man to win it, correct? The assist title.
I would have to check, but I don't feel like there would ever be another big man that would have won the assist title. And I'll also argue, while it's early, I definitely think it's something that Nikola Jokic will sustain. I think he's definitely going to sustain that number. He will finish top 5, I think, in assists. I'll predict that now. If he's not number 1, he will be top 5.
If not top 5, he'll finish in total assists probably in the top 5. He obviously averages. He'll eventually average a high number, but I don't know if I think that just the total sheer volume of him getting assists will be high. I will say one thing too, like it doesn't seem like the Grant and Plumlee losses are hurting them too much. I just think as they get Bol and PJ more comfortable in that offense, I think the better they're going to be. And it's been 6 games. They're not gonna figure it out overnight.
Yeah, I think it's just one of those situations. Things are have been tough early on from them, but they're going to figure it out as we go along. All right, the next topic we got, one of the big stories of the offseason is the James Harden saga in Houston. Since the season has begun, other than the Rockets opening night game being postponed due to contact tracing, most likely directly related to James Harden and his late arrival to training camp, there hasn't been much on the front with trade rumors as it comes to Harden. The impending big Harden trade has really cooled off in the news. Trevor, is this news or snooze?
It's snooze, and I think it's snooze for now. I will say this, though, on December 31st, because there was a little delay in when we recorded these pods, trying to get this set up with Apple, but Brian Windhurst came out with the article on New Year's Eve stating how this feels oddly familiar to another trade saga that we discussed on Pod 1, actually. Prior to seeing that article, I mentioned how this felt like a Kawhi situation in Toronto where it's looming. Teams are going to get nervous. Teams are going to get weird, and they're going to try to go for him. It's just a matter of obviously when and who. And obviously I came up with a sneaking suspicion of draft picks and young assets for Portland if they just really want to go for it and they just really think they have him at the deadline. I don't think his value tanks like it would, like an Anthony Davis trade might have happened at the deadline. I don't. It's the same situation. I don't think his value decreases in any way, even if it is at the deadline. Then Houston wants him gone. It's just a matter of when, and teams want him. It's just a matter of when. I think that Brian Windhurst thing, he obviously is a guy that I really trust in any NBA circle. He's been doing this a long time. He's been covering LeBron a long time, specifically, in terms of just he's never really been wrong in a LeBron aspect. He's been in his circle a long time, from even going back to when he was coming out of high school. But I trust him. I trust that this feels like it's looming. It's just a matter of teams, like you mentioned a little bit, how teams are going to continue to evaluate. It's only been 6 games. They're going to figure it out. But Houston, obviously, to me, it comes down to it's now or never. In terms of they got to get him gone if they want that draft pick to be better, because there's a lot of teams that are going to be really bad. So I think it's snooze for now.
Absolutely. I think I don't think there's any indication from this that like teams have cooled off from wanting James Harden. Houston is going to hold out as long as they possibly can to get that Anthony Davis kind of trade package. I don't think they're going to get the Anthony Davis trade package quite that much. I think it will be a big deal when it comes. I wouldn't be surprised to see this continue to be cold for a month or so from now. I expect Houston kind of to hold out to the deadline, but I don't see any way that they decide to keep James Harden past the trade deadline this year. I just don't see any way that he's not in a new uniform by the time we hit the end of the season.
Are we still in the Ben Simmons for Harden camp? Is that still where you lie in terms of, obviously we don't have any suspicion in general right now, but is it still the package that Daryl Morey will continue to deny till he's blue in the face? Is it still Simmons for Harden for you?
Yeah. I'll continue to say exactly what I said in the first podcast. I think it's the most likely deal. Not a great idea of a deal, especially given like we were both really excited by the Sixers moves in the offseason, and that's shown to be true. They're 6-1 right now, and they look amazing so far. Embiid especially looks like an absolute star. I don't think it's the best idea. I still think it's one of those big possibilities up there. I think there are a lot more teams who are talking to the Rockets than we're ever going to see or we're going to hear about, because teams would be dumb not to be like talking trades with the Rockets for James Harden, especially with him wanting out. But yeah, I still see Philadelphia as the most likely option. I just don't see who else would be willing to put the kind of trade package together that Houston wants.
I'll put you on the spot for a second. I came up with my crazy trade machine mad scientist with Portland. Do you have a team off top of your head? And if not, that's your homework before pod number 3. Is if he hasn't been traded, obviously by then, if for some reason he has, come up with some crazy, like team that could surprise us like Toronto if you don't have one on top of your head here.
Okay. So the one I thought of, and I'm not sure if I've mentioned this before and can remember, but a team that I thought could push to the next level, and by next level, I mean they make the trade and they're like one of our favorites to win the title, is Denver, coming off from the Denver struggles part. The idea being if Denver's in the position where they're like right on that precipice. They're right on that edge of they're going to get there and they're going to be that big time team with Murray and Jokic. And you talked about the young talent they have. The idea comes into that Denver would try to package a lot of picks. They would obviously have to do something to match salary, but then throw in Porter Jr. as the big young centerpiece of the deal with picks and kind of trading away that draft future with Porter Jr. to create a big three of Harden, Murray, and Jokic in Denver. It's one of those situations where I think if they could pull it off without trading Murray and Jokic and make the money work, it's an excellent idea for Denver. But then again, like I said, this is more of we're down at the deadline and the Rockets aren't getting the trade packages they want, because I think that the Rockets want an all-star in return for James Harden. I just don't think they're going to get it.
So to kind of divulge your point a little bit more, you did mention this prior, and also like I have read a few things and a few reputable people mention it as well as like a long shot, but two things have to happen. I feel like I guess one thing would be, you don't think they run into this point where MPJ and a bunch of draft picks is enough. If you say they want an all-star, then do you think the Rockets are going to get greedy and going to try to get, because Harden's a generational talent, do you think they're going to try to get Murray out of that and Murray and some picks? Or does it come down to, I think if that doesn't happen, I think it's a third team involved. If a team like Denver or a big market team, I saw some awful Jaylen Brown and some picks rumors, which I don't want to talk about. I don't think it's even close to happening, but I think if a team like that gets involved, it's got to be a 3 team at that point. But do you think the Rockets run into this Murray wall where they really want Murray and that's where they back out?
Yeah, that was kind of what I was getting to. I think that if they were in a discussion with Denver, they would want Jamal Murray. I don't think they would get Jamal Murray. I don't think Denver should offer. Jamal Murray is not a guy that should be available in any trade talks and that Denver's involved in. He's an uber talented scorer who's extremely young. He should not be in any way, shape, or form near a trade block. And again, it goes back to the point. Yeah, I think the Rockets are going to get greedy. Like, it's James Harden. They've kind of had their team blow up in the past couple of months here, and they want to get something for their fans. They don't want to trade it all, it seems like, for picks and promise for the future, but they want to bring some big name in return. I think it'll be interesting to see if anybody's really willing to offer that. I don't think they will. I think that the Rockets, if they're smart, will kind of look towards a big package with a lot of picks when we get closer to the deadline. So moving to our last topic here on the News or Snooze segment. Going through these first couple weeks in the NBA, we have seen a lot of blowouts. We've had some good close games, but we've just been seeing blowouts in a record margin. I believe through the first couple weeks, we were looking at about a 20% blowout rate based on a statistic from The Ringer. And a 20% blowout rate is just a lot higher than we've seen in past years. Trevor, do you think this is news or snooze?
I think it's news in the sense that it could get worse. And I know you have some points to back up what you have to say about it. But I think only because, and the one that comes to mind, and I think this is going to be completely obvious, and we haven't covered it yet, but it's Clippers Mavs. It's the fact that, Kawhi sits and they get blown up by 50. Obviously, Luka's amazing, but Kawhi sits. That the NBA had a big problem with this load management thing a year and a half, 2 years ago, and they still do. Even though obviously I think it's the safe thing to do right now with only having basically 2 months between the season ending and beginning. But I think it can become a problem. 20% is a lot. Like, it's a lot of games. And if that continues at a staggering rate like that, shout out to the Ringer for the stat. But man, it's gonna look bad. I mean, you obviously want to save face as best you can. It's just, this season is a matter of just getting through it, getting fans in the seats by the end of the year, and getting into playoffs to preserve the season after. We talked about that a little bit at the beginning. You obviously want to preserve next season after this. I think at that rate, it's going to be really bad for, now the numbers are up big time in terms of, viewership. It's from what I saw, I know it was like a 96% push over last year, which is a lot. I know it's inflated a little bit in terms of right before Christmas there, and Christmas games obviously drive traffic no matter what for the NBA. But I think their international viewership's up as the world may be starting to get back to normal. But I think the blowouts are going to be a problem.
So thoughts here with it. I don't think it's news from a perspective that we should be worried about there being a lot of blowouts. I think in that situation, it's a snooze because it's not a stat we should be worried about. I think it's news in the sense of the reason we're having so many blowout games. We're also seeing so far this year in the NBA, as we've seen every year in recent memory, scoring is just rocketing up. Teams are scoring massive amounts of points. We mentioned earlier in the podcast that Brooklyn won a game 145-141 against Atlanta last week, and it just wasn't something that was really blinked an eye at. It wasn't a huge headline, which a 140-140 some game used to be something you only saw in an all-star game. I think the product of like teams losing by 20 a lot more is just a fact of teams are scoring more. They're going at a faster pace, putting up more shots. They're shooting more threes. They're making more threes. A 20-point deficit is not what it used to be. A 20-point deficit is not as much as we used to think it meant. So in the sense of, it's not something we need to be worried about, but it is something that's here to stay. What we kind of now see, have seen as blowouts before, are no longer as much of blowouts as we think them to be. Teams can come back from down 20, and they can do it pretty easily and pretty quickly with the pace that we play at in the NBA now. So I think it's news from the sense of it's a signal that the NBA's scoring is going up, which I think is something the NBA has been hoping for because it makes the game more exciting and attracts more fans worldwide to see a lot of scoring. But with that comes, we're going to see a lot of 20-point and more losses from teams.
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, it's news in the sense that it's a big deal, and that's news. It's news to drive the NBA traffic. I mean, it's people. You want viewership, you want the excitement. Obviously for those old school defensive gurus, and it looks horrible, and they're going to hate it, but so be it. The NBA game's evolving, and I don't think it's news in the sense of a bad thing necessarily, but this load management thing just can't get out of hand going into the next season. Like I said, we're trying to preserve. You got to keep guys like Kawhi healthy. You got to keep guys like we mentioned before. LeBron and AD are only going to play 70% of the year, which so far they haven't been, which is a little alarming in that sense. I think the All-Star break thing, they normally would take a massive jump there where they might take extra games off right before and after the All-Star break just to make sure they're ready to go for the playoffs. But I think as long as guys handle it properly and professionally, I don't see any reason why this gets out of hand fast. But obviously, in the same week we had the 50-point blowout, Steph scored 62 and they only won by 20. I just don't, I think it's going to continue to be high So be it. The NBA is at a pace where, I mean, the Raptors are shooting something like 24 or 26 threes a game, or sorry, free throws a game, which is the lowest. They're shooting 40 3-pointers a game, which is unbelievably high. Granted, they're 1-5. So as the time recording is on January 5th. So I think the NBA is going to be fine. It's going to be something that we're going to look back later and laugh at as a second pod point.
Yeah, I definitely think it's just a situation of where we are in the NBA today, and it's kind of people are kind of reacting a bit to, oh, these games have really big deficits, and it's really just a more of there's a greater pace with a lot more scoring, and that's just what it's going to look like. And I think soon it'll be pretty normalized. I think games will continue to be close and competitive. I don't think the NBA has gotten uncompetitive in that mindset, but yeah, I don't think it's something to overreact about, but it definitely is news to see where the game is going.
Yeah, the playoffs are going to be fun. We mentioned that on pod one. The playoffs are going to be awesome. This is going to be, especially if we even get 25% of the fans in seats, this is going to be a fun end of the year going into the playoffs. I think that's a good time to wrap it up, man. We covered all what we thought was really, really important. The Hammon stuff, the Curry stuff, the expansion stuff. It was a really big deal. A lot of going on this week, like you said, with Silver's mentality shifting with all that. We'll obviously keep everybody up to date on everything going on as we find out. If anything Harden wise, I do want to mention this to those who have made it this far, because we got 58 of y'all so far. Shout out to those of you who are. We do want to say, obviously emergency pods are going to be something we do when something really big happens. And I think the looming one is the Harden deal we talked about. It's going to happen. It's a matter of when. We'll get ourselves in here for 20 minutes, get our first reaction, shocker thoughts out after we find out, and we'll get it out to you. But otherwise, you'll see this once a week, sometime midweek. I'm looking forward to doing this again. It's been awesome. Anything else you have to say? Yeah,
thank you to everyone who downloaded and listened to the first podcast. We really appreciate the support. 50 something listens. The first one was more than we were expecting. If you go and listen to the podcast, remember to subscribe to it on Apple or Spotify, and leave a 5-star review if you can. Hopefully at some time in the future, maybe we'll do something where people who leave 5-star reviews can recommend things for us to talk about, and we can engage with that with you guys on the podcast. But for now, like and subscribe, help to push this out more for us, and leave a 5-star review. Thank you everyone for listening. You stayed with us through this podcast to this point in time. I'm Josh.
I'm Trevor.
And this is the 2 Pointers podcast. We will see you next week.